Right, y'all, free to land. Welcome, everybody. Hello, hello. Please make sure to rename yourself, your name, pronouns. Let us know where you're coming from. All right, free to land. So we are so excited to welcome you to the MXGM Summer School. My name is Darasia. I use she, her pronouns, and I am an organizer with the Philly chapter of the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. So just to ground you in our organization and what we are all about, if you're not familiar, the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement is an organization of Black New African people who believe in our right to self-determination, self-respect, and self-defense and self-respect. So we situate ourselves in a long legacy of revolutionary struggle for the liberation of our people, and we currently organize in 8 chapters across the country around our 6 principles of unity, which you can see on our slide. So our 6 principles to unity: number 1, we defend the human rights of all African people. We demand reparations. We promote self-determination. We oppose genocide. We demand the freedom of our political prisoners, who are our prisoners of war, and we struggle to end gender and sexual oppression. So again, welcome, welcome, welcome. If you have not yet, please make sure you rename yourself with your name and your pronouns. Let us know where you are coming from. I'm gonna check our chat, see who we have so far. Peace, Ashley, free to land, free to land. I don't see too many folks in the chat yet, but I know y'all gonna be coming through. So again, welcome, glad to have y'all. All right, so we're going to continue to move and center and ground ourselves in our community agreement. So just a reminder that we keep us safe. And so as we are here tonight, we keep ourselves safe through our community agreements as well as our digital security team. So in addition to honoring the 6 principles of unity that we already shared, you also agreed to honor the 7 aspects of the MXGM personality and practice the 7 commandments of Umoja or unity during all of our summer school sessions. So for our aspects of the MXGM personality, we are grounding ourselves and being humble when dealing with African people. Remember, you can be humble and firm at the same time. We all agree to respect the actions and customs of others. We all agree to never engage in petty, senseless arguments. We don't go places looking for arguments, ideological or otherwise. We all commit to never being afraid to wage ideological struggle or to ask questions if necessary in order to establish political clarity. We never talk to just be seen or heard, and we always practice criticism and self-criticism. And for our 7 commandments of Umoja, we remember number 1, to aid each other. Number 2, to be positive. Number 3, to be patient. Number 4, to be honest. Number 5, to show courage. Number 6, listen as much as you talk. And number 7, to be programmatic. All right, so now that we have grounded ourselves in our principle of unity and our MXGM personality and the 7 commandments of Umoja, I'm going to get to what we all came here for. So I would like to introduce you all to our speaker tonight, Jamil Abdul-Qaadir, also known as Cam Copeland, who is an educator, scholar, and organizing member of the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. He is also an assistant professor in the Department of African American and African Studies at the Ohio State University. He was a 2023-2024 postdoctoral fellow at the James Weldon Johnson Institute for the Study of Race and Difference at Emory University, and the 2022-2023 dissertation fellow in the African and African Diaspora Studies program at Boston College. His research and teaching broadly focuses on Black studies, film history and theory, critical Muslim studies, and Black radical Southern studies. His work explores how Black Muslim communities have critically engaged the moving image, contributed to theoretical discourses on Black media, and actively used the cinematic to artistically express visions for liberation. Currently, he is working on a book project titled Muhammad Gazes: Islam, Blackness, and Resistance Cinema in the United States, 1959 to 2000, which is a representational history that explores how Black Muslims have used accessible forms of film technology, such as home video, public access television, public affairs, television, and independent film to challenge dominant representations of Black Muslimness in the US media. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pass it on over to you, Jamil.
Thank you very much. I would also like to thank all of the organizers of the Grassroots Liberation School. And also thank you, Zalika, for inviting me to deliver this lecture. Thank you, Jomo, Felicia, Darasia, and all of my MXGM comrades who contributed to the Black Studies Summer School. I would also like to thank all of the teachers, lecturers, panelists, and presenters who really worked hard to make this possible. So I'm going to begin by sharing my screen. So back in December of 1964, Omowale El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, who many of us know as Malcolm X, delivered an address at the Audubon Ballroom in which he called attention to the ways in which white Western media industries are structured on Black non-existence. With the Congo on his mind, he said, they take the press with their ability to control you with image making, and they make mass murder, cold-blooded murder, look like a humanitarian project. All these thousands of Black people dying, butchered, and you have no compassion in your heart whatsoever for them because the victim has been made to look like he's the criminal and the criminal has been made to look like he's the victim. Why you and I should go on a rampage. I mean, on a rampage intelligently. During this year in which our ancestor Malcolm X has reached his centennial, I have often asked myself what this rampage might look like insofar as defining a new African resistance cinema. In my analysis, I also think about how the Shakur family, for instance, who were followers of Malcolm X in the Nation of Islam Muslim Mosque Inc., and Organization of Afro-American Unity, and later organizers with the New York Panther Party and Republic of New Africa, identified as Malcolmites. And it's important to recognize that for those who consider themselves to be Malcolmites, there is a political, cultural, and spiritual dimension, all of which are inseparable when defining their approaches to revolutionary struggle, representing a bold rejection of the inherently anti-Black religio-secular binary. In this lecture, we will explore the ways in which Malcolm X's political philosophy and vision for transforming the Black gaze gave rise to a new African resistance cinema that challenged mainstream definitions of cinema by emphasizing the Black masses collectively taking mainstream media industries to task by developing cinematic counter narratives using the forms of film technology most accessible to them. We will first explore Malcolm X's contribution to Black gazing practices in the street rostrums of Harlem, highlighting different ways this legacy was represented in films of the 60s. Secondly, we will discuss Hollywood's efforts to capitalize off of Black audiences and revolutionary iconography in the 70s Blaxploitation cycle. However, we will amplify the ways in which new African filmmakers challenged the Hollywood studio system via the LA Rebellion film movement and public affairs television. Finally, we will briefly discuss how Black communities used home video and public access television in ways that continued the Malcolmite legacy, but also responded to very aggressive attacks on the Black liberation movement by the state and its media industries throughout the 80s and 90s. Returning to Malcolm's vision of a rampage in response to the oppression of African people globally and the media industries that maintain it as key instruments of the empire, we also saw Black folks engaging in what I refer to as resistance cinema, which encompasses the various forms of film technology Black people deploy that create counter narratives to mainstream representation, ranging from insurgent practices of some filmmakers affiliated with the Malcolm influence UCLA rebellion film movement to the spontaneous use of public access TV and even home video by new African revolutionary media makers. When considering film studies in this context, my use of the term cinema seeks to challenge the disciplinary limitations of film and TV studies. Frank Wilderson III discusses how first and second wave Black film studies, though extremely important and timely interventions, did not account for Black non existence or embody, quote, the Black desire to take this country down, seen in some films between 1968 and 1980. In line with Black revolutionary nationalism that sees African people in the US as forced paper citizen subjects, as well as Black studies interventions on how Black people are dismissed from the fold of humanity globally, amplified by Malcolm's critique of white Western humanitarianism in confronting the anti-Blackness of media. If a cinema is to be Black, then perhaps it ceases to be cinema in the conventional sense. In addition to a lack of institutionality, this also leaves room for conceptualizing cinema and embodying the Black radical tradition via the cinematic, and opens greater possibilities to amplify understandings of cinema that come from people who are barred from access to the so-called professional technologies of film production. While some media studies scholars might attempt to deploy a rehabilitative corrective to this understanding of the cinematic to whip it in line with the theorizations of bourgeois disciplinary academia or the conventions of mainstream media or the traditional analyses as taught in hegemonic media studies pedagogies, resistant cinema seeks to center the theorizations of the cinematic, informed by the insurgent counterhumanism Orasami Burton describes in his brilliant analysis of the Long Attica Revolt, in order to defeat the rehabilitative discourses that seek to transform Black film studies into a normalized counterinsurgent discipline. Kara Keelan characterizes the cinematic as being initiated with the introduction of film technology, leaving wider room for a wider definition of cinema. Keeling argues that this, quote, runs the risk of subsuming things specific to other audiovisual media, such as television, under the rubric of cinema, a term that's typically equated with film. However, in my work, I am presently trying to just continue thinking and working through the question of what happens when these rubrics converge, particularly in the midst of revolutionary struggle and the associated cultural dimensions of Malcolm's revolutionary nationalism that seeks to defeat the white Western world and U.S. empire's hegemony by exercising the power to define as a feature of self-determination. Cinema and media really did play a strong impact in Malcolm's life. Back when he was known as Detroit Red, navigating his youth in the depths of Harlem, he frequently visited the cinema and he saw 1940s Black cast films like Cabin in the Sky and Stormy Weather. In viewing these films, he would actively engage in what Jacqueline Stewart refers to as reconstructive spectatorship. And this is when Black subjects, especially those whose families migrated during the Great Migration, reconstitute themselves in self-image as part of the cinematic experience. Thus, such an experience was essential in defining Malcolm's remaking of himself in the Zoot culture with other Black youth during World War II that Robin D.G. Kelley explains deepened his commitment to the anti-imperialism and the plight of the African poor and working class. During this time, he, of course, still possessed a strong racial conscience and identification with Africa as opposed to the U.S. empire. And this was largely as a result of his Garveyite roots with his family. The identification with Africa really was strong in the little household and equipped him with a gaze that worked against the state and constituted his own consciousness and framework steeped in Black pride and resistance. Perhaps he was cultivating a Black gaze when, as he states, he used to lie down and gaze at the sky and really reflect on his youth. So moving along to Malcolm X in 1959, on July 13th, two 17th, 1959, an episode of the New York-based television program Newsbeat titled The Hate Produced aired on WNTA TV. This program was produced by a black television journalist named Louis Lomax and Mike Wallace, and it was really billing itself as exploring the growth of black nationalism in major urban cities in the US. The program primarily focused on the Nation of Islam, but there was also a lesser degree of emphasis on the United African Nationalist movement. It really falsely equated black nationalism with white supremacy and established a framework for defining anti-black Islamophobia in mainstream film and television representation that really lasts to this day. In my work, I argue that the representation of Black Muslims in the hate produced involved a fusion of the racial caricatures of the Black brute. Of course, the Black brute is an image in which Black people are represented as subhuman, violent, and hypersexual threats to white society. So I argue that there's this caricature in the hate produced of the fusion between the image of the Black brute and the Muslim terrorist, which is positioned as a threat to Western society. I refer to this image as the caricature of the Black Muslim fanatic, which is positioned as a threat to white Western society. And sometimes the caricature of the Black brute, especially in the caricature of the Black brute in this image, especially in the 90s, is often substituted with the caricature of the sapphire when representing this caricature of the Black Muslim fanatic. So in essence, the hate produced this caricature of the Black Muslim fanatic via the Black Muslim street preacher, who most prominently was represented by Malcolm X in the documentary, to really present a call to action for the authorities to mobilize against and surveil Black grassroots level organizing as well as Muslims. So during his massive rallies in Harlem, Malcolm X would often speak to Black, poor, and working class audiences as a minister in the Nation of Islam. He would also refer to Islam as the nature of Black people, and sometimes the term any religion was explicitly rejected. When he used terms like by nature, he was really helping his audience to develop a gaze in which they would refuse to buy into media images and harmful frameworks of white Western society that really views Black people as inherently predatory and inferior. In essence, he was rejecting the conceptualization of Blackness as antithetical to righteousness defined by the white Western religious and secular world. His street rostrum endowed his audiences with a platform to reconstruct themselves. This reconstruction was similar to Malcolm's reconstruction during the days in which he was in the Roseland and Savoy ballrooms, as well as the cinema, watching those 1940s films. However, it contained a more direct reconstruction rooted in Malcolm's revolutionary nationalism that entailed a strong African cultural response to oppression. This powerful gaze really directly combated the representation in the hate produced. However, the Black masses, unlike the image of the fanatic in the street corner rallies, tended to reject the framing, these mainstream framings, and really read Malcolm as a revolutionary hero. After the hate produced, the street preaching tradition would also be represented in films throughout the 60s. For example, in the beginning of the independent film, the Cool World, you see it really opening up with what the script right here refers to as a Black Muslim street meeting, in which a Black man delivers a powerful speech, and he's proclaiming the white man is the devil and the Black man is the original man, while motivating Black people to succeed in fighting white supremacy. So the Cool World was actually an independent film. And this speech is very similar to, some speeches from the hate produced. The Cool World was directed by Shirley Clark, a white director. There's actually an article that was written for a newspaper stating that she attempted to, shoot a rally. However, she was quickly dismissed, of course, as a result of, obviously a white filmmaker trying to benefit off of a Black collective gathering. But what's interesting, this right here is actually a press packet, like a press book. And this is the speech. This is not the speech, I'm sorry, an excerpt from the script. But what's interesting right here is that it says lists Malcolm X is in the cast. So, I'm very interested in finding out if perhaps some elements of that, of that shooting of an actual rally were shot to make it into the film, right? So obviously, this speech at the beginning of the film is delivered, by an actor who you can see right here in the film. So you see, right here, excerpts from the speech for the quote unquote black nationalist in the film. Obviously, the speech wasn't included in the dialogue for the film. The speech was like a separate document that the actor memorized. But interestingly, right here it refers to the character as a black nationalist, whereas in the film it simply says a Muslim. So you have a representation of the street preaching tradition, really manifesting in independent film. In this film came out in 1964, but also kind of making its way into mainstream Hollywood cinema of the era. An example of this is a film that was released in 1968. This film is actually called Uptight. Uptight takes place in Cleveland, Ohio. And really, in terms of mainstream cinema of the era in the US in particular, you have a representational shift kind of taking place around 1968, after the death of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This film actually begins with scenes from Dr. King's funeral, as well as the Black community in Cleveland kind of watching footage from the funeral and listening to speeches. Being replayed outside of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So you have this manifesting in the film Uptight. Uptight is actually an interesting example. It's directed by Jules Dassin in 1968, and the script was co-written by him. It's actually based off of a book, I believe, called The Informer, but the book actually was adapted into a film actually taking place in a black community in Cleveland. The book actually doesn't take place. I believe the book actually, it takes place in Europe actually. So this film, the script was actually written by Jules Dassin, but also Julian Mayfield, who was a follower of Malcolm X in the Organization of Afro-American Unity. If you've read the autobiography, you see Malcolm actually met with him when he, visited Ghana, and they organized. And also, it was co-written by Ruby Dee as well. So you see mainstream cinema, particularly the Hollywood studio system, trying to benefit off of this representational shift that attempt to, represent the politics of Malcolm X, or manifestations of this in the mainstream. It's like I like to tell my students, it's merely a representational shift. Of course, no adopting of any of Malcolm's politics in the world of first cinema. So in 1971, there is a film that's released called Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song. This is directed by Melvin Van Peebles. Melvin Van Peebles directs this film on a budget of $150,000. So this film follows the storyline of a black male sex worker who shoots two police officers who are brutalizing a black revolutionary, and he's really on the run throughout the entire film. This film actually grossed $20 million, and is actually praised in the Black Panther newspaper in '71 by Huey P. Newton. Essentially, he says this is an example of a revolutionary film, is his argument. And he says that it really, marks the transformation in line with the Black Panther Party's philosophy of the lumpen proletariat into a revolutionary, is his argument. So you see this, his essay is the cover story of of the Black Panther newspaper. So a lot of people, a lot of Black people see this in theater, and really throughout the community, you have different responses to it. This response is in June of 71. And then in 1971, later on in September, a response is written by Lerone Bennett Jr., the editor of Ebony magazine. Essentially, he's arguing that Sweetback was not a revolutionary film, and he argues that Black cinema, Black radical cinema, should follow in the direction of Battle of Algiers. It's very interesting because Battle of Algiers also was a required film in the Black Panther Party, required viewing. That he argued this in response to Newton's essay. Additionally, one thing I want to highlight is, of course, Ebony Magazine, subscription based, also a magazine that really caters toward the Black middle class, whereas Black Panther, different distribution set up, actually distributed in the community by actual members of the party. So I think it's important to keep that in mind when assessing their different. Positions on the film. However, most scholarship on the film essentially relies on these two trajectories, the Ebony magazine trajectory as well as, the Black Panther trajectory. Interestingly, also in the newspaper Malcolm X co-founded in Muhammad Speaks, there's also a response to Sweetback written by one of the managing editors, Leon Forrest, who's also a novelist, not a member of the Nation. However, he would critique the film Sweetback, and this is shortly after Newton's response. Essentially, he says that the protagonist doesn't survive white lynching, however, escapes a Black community, carelessly deserting a community that continues to face injustice. And interestingly, he also argues that he believes that ultimately Hollywood will start turning out films of a similar tone. He argues, and really you see the emergence after this in 71 of the Black exploitation cycle. Of course, Hollywood wants to milk it for every single drop. So you have the emergence of Black exploitation film. Hollywood sees the profitability of Sweetback and really desires to benefit off of Black audiences. So you have tons of films that are being released, especially in the early 70s. The height of the Black exploitation cycle probably was from 72 to about 1975, though, remnants of it definitely last throughout the 1970s. So the term Black exploitation was actually coined by Junius Griffin, who was the director of the Hollywood NAACP. He combined Black and exploitation films. And you had tons of these being released. Some of them were directed by Black directors. However, most of them were not. You do have exceptions, of course. Gordon Parks directed the film Shaft in 71. Gordon Parks Jr., Superfly in 72. So you do have exceptions. However, you have Coffee being directed by like Jack Hill as well as Foxy Brown, right? So you have many of these discourses are being had as these films are coming out. They're literally coming out every single week. I think in 1974, for instance, about 45 of them, were released. So studios essentially making films for lower budget, but really benefiting off of Black audiences in the 1970s. And additionally, the actors not being paid very much for these films. So you have the emergence of the Black exploitation cycle. This is actually a clip, however, I tested it out so it can't be heard. So I will at the end post it in the chat. So you have a representation of Black revolutionaries in this particular film. There's a scene where the main character in Superfly, Young Blood Priest, he's actually a coke dealer, and you see him entering this restaurant with his partner, Eddie, right? So they are approached by three men who come from outside. They see him enter, two of whom have a kufi. One has an afro. They're saying they're trying to build an independent nation for Black people. However, they are totally dismissed and kind of humiliated and being asked to leave, but also kind of represented as, unprincipled in that, they say that as long as he gives them money, they don't really care that he sells coke, right? So you have this scene, and you have some of these similar scenes in other black exploitation films of the era that pretty much undermine Black revolutionaries. But this particular scene, this film obviously takes place in New York City, right? Of course, Malcolm X was formerly based in New York City. You have a couple of them, wearing kufis. Some have beards. Could perhaps be identified as Muslims as well, also representing a nationalist type of philosophy. So you have this being dismissed in many Black exploitation films of the era. And although the Black Panther would, praise Sweetback as a revolutionary film, they would also be very critical of Black exploitation film, and really critique Black exploitation for representing Black revolutionaries as stumbling fools with no program to serve the community, obviously being controlled by others. So you have that as well. So insofar as responses and resistance to Black exploitation, really kind of simultaneously, you have something called Black public affairs television really developing. After the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In '68 and the movement of some Black youth organizers toward the Black Power movement, you have many Black produced television programs, rising around the country, typically with national education television. This is a clip from a program called Say Brother. Say Brother actually aired in Boston. It's a public affairs program, meaning it covers public affairs in Black communities, community events. Some of the programs also feature interviews with activists and organizers, also cover issues Black people and communities face in their given locales. And some of them have an artistic component in that, some of them actually have performances by Black spoken word artists, musicians, etc. So, an example of how this emerged. So, Say Brother really emerged in Boston in '68 after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. City officials really did not want to see any forms of Black protest or resistance, right? So in Boston, in order to undermine just Black people generally, the city hosted a James Brown concert, thinking Black people would stay home and not protest and not go out in the streets and fight for their community. So they hosted a James Brown concert and actually televised the concert, and they. I guess they felt content with the results. So afterwards, they worked with, WGBH, which is Boston's form of national education television, the Boston version, in order to get a show on the air. Even though this program was really emerged out of a desire to undermine Black resistance, right? It kind of took a trajectory and life of its own, often empathizing with the Black Power movement, right? Um, and also covering issues facing the masses and allowing citizens also to air their voices throughout the Black community who are perhaps banned from and are not covered on mainstream public affairs programs like ABC's Issues and Answers, Meet the Press, etc. So this was a local phenomenon in Boston. Different cities had different different public affairs programs that emerged in 1968. I think South Carolina, for instance, there was one called for blacks only, right? So Say Brother took a life of his own. You can see right here, these are early interviews, one with Hakeem Jamal, and also one with Ella Collins, Malcolm's sister, right? So it ends up taking a more oppositional tone. And its producer was a young black man by the name of Ray Richardson at the time. And Ray Richardson, in an episode, was really uncovering the role of the US government in the assassination of Dr. King as well as Malcolm X, right? And in this particular episode, it caused an uproar from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and NET National Education Television, and the show was canceled around 1969, I believe. However, the community really rallied around, and the show ended up coming back, however, without Ray Richardson, right? However, despite the fact the show came back without Ray Richardson, it still continued this trajectory through the mid 1970s. Then around the mid 70s, a lot of other similar public affairs programs um, ended up taking ended up taking, I guess, positions that were not really in line with the Black Power movement, right? However, you also have other programs like a national program called Black Journal that emerged. There was a program called Soul. Soul was also a national program. Soul aired from 1968 to 1973. And it was shot in New York City via a live studio audience. So it was, they featured many people and many, like for instance, one of the earlier episodes featured an interview with Dr. Betty Shabazz. They also featured performances by many musicians like, Patti LaBelle, the Delphonics. And also there was an episode, for instance, Soul really focused on Black art and culture. There was an episode called The Black Woman that featured many Black women poets on the particular episode. It had a largely Black woman production staff. Also, Ellis Hazlip. Right here, he actually was the host of the show. He became the host. He was the producer of Soul as well. He was also openly queer and also asked questions about where, the different movements and figures he had on the show, where they stood whenever it came to gender and sexual liberation as well. However, Black Journal and Soul, the Nixon administration really canceled the programs, like cut the funding for the programs. So Soul really went away in 1973 as a result of the state. And Black Journal actually went away very briefly. However, they were able to resume because Black Journal had a huge fan club in various cities. So there were many protests in support of Black Journal. So that ended up lasting. However, one thing I would like to say is that later on, many of these programs, like Say Brother later in, I believe, 81, became known as Basic Black, for instance. So many of these programs were not necessarily aligned with the Black Power movement in their later days, especially in the latter half of the 1970s and the 80s, right? So Black Journal later becomes known as Tony Brown's Journal, for instance. Of course, Tony Brown became involved with the Republican Party, so yeah, it pretty much went south in a way. So there's another one called Like It Is. Like It Is was hosted by Gil Noble, started in 68 and actually lasted until 2011. It has a very unique legacy in that, like It Is as a program, it never really abandoned its positions. As you can see, there's an interview, I believe, from the late 1980s in Cuba with Assata Shakur. They also covered, the trials of political prisoners like the New York Three in the 1980s. Um, So it really maintained its position. There's actually an episode from the 90s with the debate from some guy from the ADL and Dr. Ben Yakanin, something you wouldn't see on, for instance, on mainstream public affairs programs. So you see really this Black public affairs television also functioning as a direct resistance to Black exploitation as well. I know we discuss articles in Muhammad Speaks about Black exploitation film, and really they would put Black exploitation film or look to Black Power TV, which some refer to Black public affairs television as an alternative way that the Black masses could actually be involved in the process and also, resist some of these mainstream media industries. Another thing I want to discuss is the LA Rebellion film movement. And the LA Rebellion film movement also contains some resistance against Black exploitation film and just the studio system generally. So, resistance cinema was really deployed against First Cinema in the Hollywood studios system via the LA Rebellion film movement, which consisted of a group of Black filmmakers that came out of UCLA School of Film, Theater, and Television in the 60s and 70s, and really through the late 80s. There was a program started at UCLA as a means of also integrating the film school called the Ethno Communications Program, interestingly. And really, these filmmakers, many of them were from Africa and really all throughout the diaspora, including the United States as well. And some of them, the great majority of them, there are some exceptions, which we can talk about if you all are interested, were influenced by the Black radical tradition and third cinema. They really studied a lot of third cinema theorists from Latin America in their classes, and they also resisted traditional film education. In some ways, this was also seen directly in the classroom. Like there's a story where one of the professors was teaching about D.W. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation in 1915 and would not allow critiques of the anti-Blackness in the film to be aired in the class, really wasn't contextualizing the film at all. And this is actually something very common to this very day in film education, right? Not really contextualizing this enough. I saw this directly happen, and while I was, at USC Film School, right, and had to definitely challenge it in an intro to film class back in the day. So these film in the classroom, the director, the professor of the class wasn't allowing critiques of The Birth of a Nation or wasn't critiquing it sufficiently enough. So two of the students, part of the LA Rebellion, actually ended up picking him up, removing him from the classroom, and really escorting him across campus, and then returning to the classroom and teaching a different lesson. And you had a tendency to desert image perfection and linear narrative of Hollywood and Western forms of the moving image, right? So when the students arrived at UCLA Film School, they had to complete a Project One assignment, which was their first film produced in the program. As Allison Nadia Field notes, the project involved a radical unlearning that encompassed challenging the limitations of white Western pedagogies, particularly as they manifested in film education. Cleveland native Larry Clark entered UCLA in 1970, and he directed his 12-minute experimental film Tamu for his Project One assignment. This film is a revolutionary meditation on the Black liberation struggle from the perspectives of a Black revolutionary man and woman. The film opens with an excerpt from the Ballad of the Bullet speech, right? You can hear Malcolm X's voice in the background. When we open our eyes today and look around America, we see America not through the eyes of someone who has enjoyed the fruits of Americanism. We see America through the eyes of someone who has been the victim of Americanism. We don't see any American dream. We've only experienced the American nightmare. So you have his voiceover critiquing the U.S. empire and Western society, and you see really the two characters engaging in a meditation on the black struggle. You also He also has a soundtrack that consists of not only Malcolm X's voice from the Ballad of the Bullet as well as Message to the Grassroots, but even Pharoah Sanders is included on the soundtrack, right? As well as the Last Poets, right? So you have them, and you also have the images of Angela Davis as well as Eldridge Cleaver really included in this particular film, right? So you have all of these influences. If we also think about Malcolm X being involved, particularly on the jazz scene back in the day, we see some influences or some working with some elements of Malcolm's political philosophy in the film as well. So Larry Clark was born in Cleveland and he was raised there for a significant portion of his childhood. And he actually used to photograph members of the Republic of New Libya as well as the Afro-Set Black Nationalist Party for Self-Defense, two revolutionary nationalist formations deeply influenced by Malcolm X. And these photos actually help him get into the UCLA film department, right? So his second film was actually called As Above, So Below, which you can see right here. And it features a black ex-Marine named Jita Hadi, portrayed by Nathaniel Taylor. Nathaniel Taylor is well known for starring in the television program, playing the role Rollo. He starred in the television program Sanford and Son in the 1970s. Later on, in this film, As Above, So Below, is about urban guerrilla warfare, right? And it really places the black struggle really in solidarity with black people throughout the world, but also with third world oppressed nations, and really seeing the black community as an internal colony within the United States. As Above, So Below also features a church scene with members of the guerrilla cell, featuring a member of the guerrilla cell engaging in worship. And she also operates a coffee shop. So she frequently praises Jesus. And while this representation is sometimes read by people as, rendering the character unassuming when it comes to her involvement in the revolutionary underground, in a post-screening interview a few years ago, Larry Clark stated that he desired to depict the centrality of spirituality in the Black freedom struggle. Larry Clark's magnum opus was a film called Passing Through, which really centers the legacy of jazz music as well as the Black radical tradition. This film is a film that he primarily screens at different events. It's not a film that's super accessible unless you maybe go to the UCLA Film and Television Archive and view it. But it really follows a black musician named Eddie Warmack, and Eddie Warmack is portrayed by Nathaniel Taylor as well. And he's trying to rediscover his sound after being released from prison for killing a white mob boss who blinded one of his fellow musicians. He also was involved in the 71 Attica prison rebellion. So you see images of the newsreel footage from the actual rebellion really combined with the narrative in the story. So you have this happening, and you also have many montage sequences in which Warmack, he plays the saxophone, as you can see on the right. And really, when he plays his music, you see the montage sequences, begin. And you see a strong improvisational style of free jazz really being inscribed into the film and the aesthetics of the film. Really, the improvisational style of Passing Through is an essential part of New Africans combing through the tools of resistance to engage in struggle. It's really manifested in the form of art and the cultural dimensions of revolutionary struggle. And it's also deeply connected to armed resistance, as you see Warmack resisting behind prison walls. Warmack is a musician, but his arts and the art of ritual and art making is part of struggle in the film. This is why the montage sequences begin when he plays his saxophone, and it shows him in Attica engaging in a face-off with the state. This is why he killed the white exploitative capitalist business owners who blinded his comrade, friend, and fellow musician. Warmack is really firmly within a Malcolmite tradition that, of course, has its precedence in the resistance of Africans to slavery and colonialism. And really, there are many other examples of LA Rebellion films that are dependent on this symbiotic spiritual, cultural, and revolutionary elements. So you have this happening in the LA Rebellion film movement, and also this film was screened in '77 at a benefit for Assata Shakur and Desi Woods. So you have this film directly being engaged in movement spaces, and this is actually from a film directed by Barbara McCullough, Shopping Bag Spirits and Freeway Fetishes, where she's discussing the role of, ritual in art. And she's discussing her own journey as a filmmaker and connecting this also to spirituality, culture, but also political consciousness as well. This is a documentary film she released. As we're short on time, I just kind of also want to mention that, in the 1980s, you had less films being made by Hollywood, of course, LA Rebellion film movement, independent film movement. However, you have less films being made by Hollywood. You have Hollywood really getting more aggressive in its approach to undermine the Black freedom struggle as well as undermine Black cultural production. As Ed Guerrero notes, Hollywood went from producing 45 Black focused films in '74 to an average of 6 to 7 in the '80s, ushering in an era referred to as a cinema of recuperation. You have the US really trying to regain and promote its ideology. It often represented a return to the great white hope, patriarchy, imperialism, and something very common was the buddy cop film, a film like Colors, for instance, that really reinforces Hollywood's support for the carceral state during this era. Um, in many ways, Black communities also use home video. An example of this was an organization known as the El Rukins. They actually shot many home videos in 1979. These were essentially parties. The El Rukins, they were previously known as a Black Stone Ranger, a street organization in Chicago. However, they were also involved in the Black Power and civil rights movements, right? So you have they actually host parties. They embraced Islam and became known as El Rukin in 1976. And on the top floor of their headquarters, they will host parties, and the bottom floor was actually a mosque, right? So you can see them using film technology. This is actually a television set right here, and really engaging in the moving image during this particular era in which the Black freedom struggle and just Black people in general, are being targeted by the U.S. empire, right? So you have this happening, and you see they actually belong to the Moorish Science Temple at this time, so they're wearing red fezzes on their heads. So you really have them engaging in the cultural dimensions of struggle, based on Malcolm X's philosophy, as well as the spiritual dimensions and even the revolutionary dimensions, as some were citizens of the RNA as well. So you have this happening. Interestingly, thinking of third cinema as well. One of the essays the LA Rebellion studied was an essay by Fernando Solanas as well, and Octavio Aguetino. And in this essay, Toward the Third Cinema, they really define first cinema as being the Hollywood studio system, second cinema, European like art film, and also second cinema really entailing a desire to ultimately move into first cinema as well, get those opportunities. And third cinema being something that is totally dissociated from, that type of aspiration as well. In terms of assessing the LA Rebellion film movement in third cinema, there have been some arguments because some of their films were funded by like National Endowments of Humanities, as well as many of these others. I believe Ford Foundation as well, LA Rebellion. So there is the argument that they lie outside of a third cinema tradition. So that argument exists, even though they were influenced and definitely studied a lot of third cinema theorists. However, I think home video is an interesting way of looking at it in that, these films are very spontaneous, right? These are spontaneous films. These are very spontaneous films. Additionally, they are not, funded by these types of foundations, quite obviously, as well. And you also have Black communities, and particularly organizers, using public access TV as resistance. And public access television really emerged in the 70s when the FCC delegated the top 100 largest cable markets must make channels available and equipment for general public to have access. So it rapidly expanded in the 80s, gaining prominence among New Left activists. This is a program called Paper Tiger Television that was popular among New Left activists. You see Safia Bukhari here. This episode was called CBS Tries the New York Three: Racist Lies on Primetime TV. In 1988, 1985, I'm sorry, CBS actually produced a program called, a film called Badge of the Assassin that was really aimed at vilifying the New York Three Panthers, framed and accused of shooting two police officers. So really, Paper Tiger Television was a response to that, featured the New York Three, got out the narrative of what really happened, and also exposed some of the counterintelligence happening when it comes to media industries in the 1980s and the Black liberation movement. So yes, so these are some examples of really Black activists kind of building off of the legacy of Malcolm X and his work with media. Of course, he established Muhammad Speaks newspaper in order to also resist dominant narratives, but also get the program out there. Additionally, he had a particular way of navigating visual media during the time, and we see, the afterlives being manifested in independent film, home video, and public access and public affairs television throughout the end of the 20th century. Thank you. And if we have time for questions, we can begin those.
All right. Thank you so much, Jamil. That was absolutely amazing. I know that I learned a lot, so thank you so much for this rich history on Black media and revolutionary cinema. I think there was one question that came up, so let me take a look. So there was one question from Monique. Could you share some of the current third cinema work we should explore? Um, so we are short on time. So maybe if there's like 2 or 3 pieces you think would be critical for us to explore.
Yeah. So in terms of third cinema work, are you talking about like writings or films or? Yes. Well, okay. I'll just say one example of a film, I guess that is popular is definitely Battle of Algiers, that has, a link to this particular history. Of course, we discussed how this was required viewing for the Black Panther Party back in the day. Additionally, many others. I know I was talking about the Republic of New Libya and Ahmed Evans in the 1960s, right? Interestingly, he was based in Cleveland. I was recently doing some research, and Ahmed Evans also was Muslim, and his an imam in Cleveland actually ended up preparing his body when he died as a political prisoner behind bars. But interestingly, at that particular mosque, they also screened Battle of Algiers as well. So, I think that's a very important text, for instance. And also, my apologies, kind of rushing it in the end of this presentation. Yes, I didn't realize the material would take so long to cover, but thank you all so much for bearing with me.
Yeah, so you did get some comments. Folks felt like this was very informative and very interesting. So, we understand you're a researcher, you got a lot of information, so it's all good. Thank you so much. All right, so it is 8:02. I know it's going to be time for us to transition to our classes. So, the class Zooms will open shortly.